Special thanks to Horizon Therapeutics for sponsoring the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast, working tirelessly to research, develop, and bring forward medicines for people living with rare and rheumatic diseases. Discover more about Horizon Therapeutics' mission at horizontherapeutics.com.
To compete on a stage, not only just the Paralympic stage in general, but then in a sold-out stadium, truly is something that I will never forget, sort of hearing the stadium roar as I was racing the 100. When I had a spinal cord injury, that was always my window that I looked through, and my frame of reference was always that this is what it is, but let's look and see what the opportunities are, and there's been a lot. Yeah, so I applied to University of Illinois. And I actually, when I got my offer of admission, I accepted the offer of admission without even telling my parents, because I knew that there was just no other school. That was it. As soon as I got in, that's where I was going.
The goal of the program is not just to create great athletes, it's to create great people who really contribute to the sport and to the movement.
2 student Paralympic champions and their coach, all participants in the University of Illinois Adaptive Sports Program, one of the most advanced programs of its type. We'll hear the stories of these 3 amazing people and how they've overcome and succeeded in their lives and the Paralympics. It's an amazing trio of stories you'll hear right now on this Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. Say hello to host David Hirsch.
Hi, and thanks for listening to the Dad to Dad podcast, Fathers Mentoring Fathers of Children with Special Needs, presented by the Special Fathers Network.
The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children connect with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for dads to support dads. To find out more, go to 21stcenturydads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we'd be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad.
So let's hear these stories now as David Hirsch talks to Adam Bleakney, Amanda McGrory, and Brian Siemann.
I'm thrilled to be talking today with 3 fellow Illini friends associated with the Adaptive Athletics program at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Adam Bleakney, head coach of wheelchair, track, and road racing, and a 2002 UIUC alum. Amanda McGrory, an archivist and collections curator for the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee, and a 2010 as well as 2018 UIUC alum. And Brian Siemann, a learning disabilities and ADHD specialist at University of Illinois, as well as a 2008 UIUC alum. Adam, Amanda, and Brian, thank you for taking the time to do a podcast interview for the Special Fathers Network.
Pleasure.
So for the first set of questions, I'm going to go round robin, starting with Adam. Let's start with some background. Where did you grow up? Tell me something about your family, Adam.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in north central Iowa, Mason City, Iowa, to be exact. And I grew up with an older brother, mom and dad. And when I think back of growing up, it was primarily about sport and competing. And that was a big part of my life as far back as I can remember. And a big part of that, a big influence in that was my dad. And that was one way that we grew up and spent a lot of time together. He had been an standout athlete as both a high school and collegiate athlete, and so that interest and that passion he passed on to me, and primarily in wrestling. That was his sport of choice. But in addition to that, baseball, and many of my formative years were spent with him either on baseball trips or wrestling trips, and he coached me in both sports all the way up through high school. So I think is just as far as the values that I learned, and as I say, a lot of those formative experiences and learning experiences came through athletics.
Excellent. I'm sort of curious to know, Adam, what did your dad do for a living?
My dad worked in the egg business. He was a loan officer for 40 plus years. We come from a farming family and farming background. He grew up on a farm, as did my mom. And so that was in his blood, and although he didn't take the family farm, his older brother did. This was one way he could keep his his feet in the water.
Excellent. So was there an important lesson or takeaway that comes to mind from your dad?
I think my dad was always very, very positive, very intense, but never in a way that placed any undue expectation on me. It was rather, I think, a prodding and expectation that you're going to work each day to move toward your goal and reach your personal capacity. And so you become shaped by the way that the environment that you grew up in. And certainly for me, for both, and my mom too, both were very driven and expected a lot of themselves. And by extension, I expected a lot of myself as well.
Excellent. Well, thanks for sharing it. Your dad was super involved. That's what I heard you saying.
Yes.
Coaching your sports. He created an era of excellence or expectations that he held himself to, and perhaps rubbed off on you and your older brother. So I'm sort of curious to know what the nature of your disability is and how did it come about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a spinal cord injury, and it was a result of a mountain biking accident when I was 19. So between my freshman and sophomore year of college, I was out in Colorado in Breckenridge on vacation with a buddy, and went down the mountain too fast beyond what a flatlander from Iowa could handle, and I hit a tree and flipped over, and that was that. So it's been a few years ago now.
Okay, well, thanks for sharing. And just to be clear, as a result, you're paraplegic, right? You don't have use of your leg.
Yep. So I'm a full-time wheelchair user for mobility.
Gotcha. Great, thank you. So I'm sort of curious to know how your career transpired since you got your degree or degrees at UofI, because it doesn't sound like you ever left.
Yeah, well, I did for 2 years after I finished grad school, and I worked for a community organization in Atlanta, and with the job of being a liaison between this national office and different satellite programs around the country, and just helping them to develop and run wheelchair sports programs. And so I did that for a couple years, and then the coach who had been here for 20 plus years and had been my coach and had been very, very influential in the direction that my life took. Marty Morris retired, and I was fortunate enough to get the job offer, and that was 2005. So, but you're right. Since 1997, I've spent most of my life in the same zip code.
Excellent. Well, thanks for sharing. And one last question, as far as background is concerned, I'm sort of curious to know what's been your greatest challenge as well as accomplishment.
I think my greatest accomplishment, so that's easy. That's having two awesome kids. I have a freshman in high school and I have a sixth grader in middle school. Hands down, that's of anything that I've done, creating these two awesome kids. That's that's the best. But
I thought you were going to lead with saying that was your greatest challenge as well.
That's true. You're right. We'll just say, yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, that is true. Raising kids is definitely a significant responsibility and a huge challenge. So, but I've always had the attitude that your response is controlled, and your perception of the circumstances is controlled, and you can define any situation as being a challenge or as an opportunity. Not that it's all rainbows and sunshine, because there certainly are things that are more difficult than other things. But I think that it's that autonomy and independence of choosing your attitude toward any situation. I think that you just kind of manipulate and twist those challenges into seeing what opportunity can you pull out of those.
Well, that's an important insight, though, because I think you can think about, is it a challenge or is it an opportunity? And it's one and the same, right? And if you have the right attitude, I think you can, take whatever the situation is and try to make the most of it. That's what I heard you say.
Yeah. I think so. I think that when I had a spinal cord injury, that was always my window that I looked through, and my frame of reference was always that this is what it is, but let's look and see what the opportunities are. And there's been a lot, and it's been incredibly and enriching and highly with a lot of value points in my life, directly as a consequence of that event. And so I think that's I guess that's an example of something that could be considered to be a challenge, but if you apply what I think the appropriate frame, then it can be also an opportunity to have that experience.
Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing. Okay, Amanda, it's your turn. Where did you grow up? Tell me something about your family.
I grew up in southeastern Pennsylvania in a little town called Kennett Square, about 45 minutes outside of Philadelphia. I am the oldest of 3, and I have an absolutely enormous extended family. My dad's one of 6, my mom's one of 7, and almost everyone, so like 350 family members, still live within a few hours of that Philadelphia area. And I'm the black sheep that keeps moving further and further west. I'm in Colorado right now.
Well, thanks for sharing. I'm sort of curious, what did your dad do for a living, and how would you describe your relationship with him?
My dad's self-employed. He owns a small business. He does custom countertops and kitchen renovations for residential as well as commercial properties. And if I had to describe my dad, I would say he is and was notoriously rebellious and pretty hell-bent on finding his own path, forging his own path. He went to Catholic school, and the uniform rule was you had to wear a shirt and tie, so he wore Hawaiian shirts with plaid ties and plaid jackets. Like, that's just who my dad is. And so he's always been very, very supportive and very encouraging of me finding my way, figuring out what I wanted to do, and supporting me with whatever that journey looked like. He also had like bright red curly hair. So the whole combination was a little bit of like a color explosion.
Well, thanks for sharing. So I'm sort of curious to know, was there an important lesson or takeaway that comes to mind when you think about your dad?
So kind of jumping back to him forging his own path, I think that was really important. And seeing him take risks, trust in himself, and think outside the box, I think was really, really valuable to me. I have taken a pretty non-traditional career path, starting with going to college, being a professional athlete for 6 or 7 years, going back to grad school in my 30s, and then ending up in the position that I am in here. But I have had nothing but support from my dad and from both of my parents the whole way through. When I graduated from undergrad and was talking about being a professional wheelchair marathoner, it wasn't, that's ridiculous, you can't do that. It was more like, okay, well, let's figure this out and see if it's a possibility. Talk about the plans, talk about what you can do, and figure out how we can make this work. And then if you can't, then we'll look at what your other options are. And I think that knowing that I had that support from him and from my mom kind of gave me the confidence and the courage to take some of those risks and see what happened.
That's fabulous. So I'm sort of curious to know, what is the nature of your disability and how did it come about?
So I am diagnosed with transverse-myelitis. It's a rare neuroimmune disorder that affects somewhere between 1 in 5 to 1 in 20 million people. It manifests itself similarly to MS. It's a demyelinating disorder. So the basic story, an external factor caused my immune system to get confused. It attacked my spinal cord, demyelinated the nerve cells there, which prevents nerve signals from passing from my brain down to my lower body, and I'm a complete paraplegic as a result.
Wow. So at what age did that happen?
I was 5. It happened in 1991, so I was a kindergartner.
Wow. That must have been overwhelming for you as well as your parents, for that matter.
I would absolutely say so. It was difficult for me understanding what happened. Unlike an injury like Adam's, crash into a tree, there's a distinct cause of what happened. For me, I woke up one day and couldn't walk, which is a 5-year-old. I mean, that's difficult for anyone to understand, but as a 5-year-old, it was really, really confusing for me, and I didn't understand why that day was different than any other day. And it was scary because I now didn't know what was going to happen when I woke up tomorrow or 2 days or 3 weeks later. For my parents, they were both really young. My mom was 29 and my dad was 31. And looking back to me as a 29-year-old or a 31-year-old, I can't imagine how terrifying that would have been.
Yeah, well, thanks for mentioning that. So you made reference to your education. I'm sort of curious to know what led you to the University of Illinois.
For me, it was sports. I started racing and playing basketball in 1997 when I was 11. My parents were very interested in finding a way for me to remain active. I was really active as a kid, played outside, ran around, loved to ride my bike, and that all changed when I came home from the hospital and was a wheelchair user. So I was having a hard time figuring out where I fit in with some of my friends from school, what I could still do. And they thought that it would be a great opportunity for me to be active and also to find a community of other kids with disabilities if I started participating in sports. So it was pre-internet days, and they searched and researched, and it took a really long time to find anything. But it just so happened that the city of Philadelphia was starting a kids adaptive sports program the summer of 1997. They were going to do wheelchair basketball and wheelchair racing. So I started then. It turned out that I was little and I was fast and I had some natural talent when it came to both of them. And as a kid, you always like doing things that you're good at. And so I quickly fell in love with both of them. I was really fortunate that my dad, being self-employed and having his own business, had a lot of freedom and was able to take time off to drive me an hour and a half into the city, to take Fridays off and Mondays off so that we could go on weekend trips to basketball tournaments and to races, to leave work early to take me to practice after school. And the older I got, the more serious I got. And so I wasn't going to go to a school where I couldn't participate in sports. And as far as programs that had both wheelchair racing and wheelchair basketball, there's nothing that beats the University of Illinois as far as the legacy and the prestige of that program.
Okay, well, it seems like that was your destiny to go to University of Illinois in Champaign then. So were there any mentors that come to mind, either from your growing up years or your university years?
So it's obviously my parents were huge influences on me, supporting the choices that I made, encouraging me to think outside the box and to take some risks and to really challenge myself and push myself. The spring of my freshman year is actually when Adam came in as a coach. And I don't like to tell him that he was very influential on my career and who I am, but he definitely was. I ended up switching over from wheelchair basketball to focusing more on wheelchair racing after Adam and another UofI alum bribed me into doing a marathon. So that really changed the course of my entire future and my entire athletic career.
Okay, well, let's go into that story because I remember you sharing with me before. I thought it was pretty entertaining.
So I recently learned that the story I was told and all of the facts about this were not correct. But Adam and another very successful wheelchair racer and UofI alum, Scott Hollenbeck, convinced me that in order to attend an elite wheelchair racing camp in Georgia, I would have to also participate in the Colfax Marathon and turn over any prize money I was lucky enough to win to cover the expense of bringing me, a lowly sophomore who was not nearly fast enough to attend this camp, to the camp. And so went to the camp, had a great experience, thought that maybe I was going to get off the hook. Sure enough, got a call that it was time for me to sign up for the Colfax Marathon. Flew out to Colorado, did my very first marathon, finished in just over 2 hours, was third place, was like, okay, well, I had this experience. I did a marathon. I'm going to check it off the bucket list. Now I'm done. Wasn't really sure I ever wanted to do another one. And then 3 weeks later, they teamed up on me again to do my second marathon, in which they promised that I could keep any prize money that I won, which was much too tempting of an offer as a 20-year-old college student on a very limited budget. So that is the story of how my marathon career began. And I'm now 15 years in and probably close to, if not over, 100 marathons at this point.
Oh my gosh. And what's your best time, out of curiosity?
My best time, it was at the Boston Marathon, which with a tailwind, which is a really fast course for wheelchair athletes because it's a net downhill. So I'm not sure, it might be cheating, but my best time is an hour and 33 minutes.
Oh my God. It sounds like an inhuman possibility. This is like a motorized chair or just self-propelled?
Just a really, really good tailwind, and I don't weigh very much, so I just kind of got pushed along.
It sounds like you might have had a cell or something on your chair. Okay, well, thanks for sharing. Very inspiring, very funny story. So how has your career transpired since you graduated undergrad and then beyond?
So after graduating undergrad, like I said, I wasn't really sure who I was yet, what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. Remember having a talk with Adam about how I was really frustrated with my performance. And I felt like I was doing all the right things. I was showing up to training, but I wasn't hitting the times or the speeds I wanted to hit. And racing the way that I knew that I wasn't going to be medal potential. So we talked about what we could do. And so I changed a whole bunch of things, changed my equipment up, changed my diet. But the biggest change that we made was going back to school. And Adam strongly believes, the research says, student athletes perform better. And so for me, being overly focused on my training wasn't a good thing for me. I never had a break from it. I was just focused 100% on training all day, every day. If I had a bad practice, I was thinking about that until I got up and showed up at practice the next morning. So it was a huge, huge thing for me to go back to school and have something else to work on and break up my day a little bit. So I entered the master's program for library and information science with the goal of hopefully coming out of it as an archivist. I learned about the archives at the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee while I was in school and applied for an internship there as soon as I graduated. Was lucky enough to get the internship, which was pretty fantastic because it felt like the perfect marrying of my personal and professional interests. So finished that internship, moved back to Champaign, was training for the Tokyo Games. And during that, with the delay of games, the archivist that I interned under announced her retirement. The job position was posted. So as a long shot, I applied and was lucky enough to get hired as the director of the archives and the collections curator in July of last year. So made the move out to Colorado, had another big talk with Adam about what that was going to look like for my racing career, and decided that this was too good of an opportunity for me to turn down.
That's a fabulous story, and congratulations on sort of re-educating yourself and then finding what sounds like a dream job, right? Given
it's perfect.
Yeah, life's journey and your experience. So one last question. What's been your greatest challenge and what would you consider your greatest accomplishment?
For me, it was definitely figuring out who I was and who I am and what my place is in this world. So coming out of rehab as a 5-year-old who was a wheelchair user whose whole world had changed, kids are resilient, but it's still difficult and it's still a hard transition. And I think that with the support of my parents, the support of my dad, helping me find sports and find that community, encouraging me to be independent and take a risk and move to Illinois, to take a risk and try out being a professional athlete, to go back to grad school and figure out how I was going to work and pay for that on my own, and then accept this position and move to Colorado in the middle of a pandemic all by myself. That's it. Those are the big challenges, and those are the big accomplishments.
That's fabulous. Well, thanks for sharing. Very enlightening. Okay, Brian, it's your turn. Where did you grow up? Tell me something about your family.
So I grew up in Millstone, New Jersey. I was born in Brooklyn, but because my parents were both born there. But we lived in New Jersey, and so that's where I grew up. Something about my family, I guess. So I am a quadruplet. I am one of 4, 3 girls and myself. I also have an older brother as well, John, who's 4 years older. So that's always kind of my fun sort of familial fact is that I'm a quadruplet.
Yeah, well, there's not that many of you out there.
No, I've never met I met a bunch of twins and some triplets. I've never met someone older than a quadruplet or more than a quad. So it's always kind of my one. As soon as I do, I don't know how I'm going to respond to that because my sisters and I always joke that like we've never met another set of quads or higher order multiples.
Well, I think I shared with you one of my good friends from undergrad at University of Illinois got married to another UofI person, and they had a daughter, had trouble having children, and then had 4, 3 girls and a boy, coincidentally, just like you. And all 4 of them, quads, ended up going to the University of Illinois as well. Now, they graduated about 8 years ago. And if it's meant to be, I'll have to introduce you to my friends, John and Holly Madden, the ones with the quadruplets.
That'd be awesome. My sisters and I made a conscious choice to we weren't allowed to apply to the same schools. My journey to Illinois sort of is different from theirs. But yeah, we all were, that was the one rule. We weren't allowed to apply to the same schools that each other were.
That's very interesting. We'll have to dig into that. So out of curiosity, what does your dad do for a living?
My dad is now retired, but for, over 25 years, he worked in New York in like proxy solicitation and corporate governance. His sort of career trajectory to get to that, he's sort of done it all. He's kind of a jack of all trades in terms of his entire life. While he was in school, he went to Fordham and got his bachelor's in history. He got his master's and PhD in history as well from Columbia. But in that interim, he's been a bartender. He was an umpire for a baseball team. He played softball, football coach. He's kind of done it all. And then he wound up at this firm that doing proxy solicitation and sort of engaging with people and things like that. And so his story is one of that's really fascinating. And there are stories that probably can't be discussed publicly of some of the things that he's done. It's just kind of fun to kind of listen to him sort of and hear his story about how he grew up.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. Is there an important takeaway, a lesson that comes to mind when you think about your dad?
I think for my dad, especially given kind of everything that he's done in his life, and something that he's always tried to instill in us is this, like, to pursue our passion, to work towards that, and to take that time and think about what's important to you and to pursue it. Again, yeah, his trajectory to his career and even, meeting my mom and then having children and everything was not typical and not normal. And so with all of us, it was find what you love and really pursue it. And you'll be, at the end of the day, by pursuing what we were passionate about, we'd be happy. And that's all he really wanted for us.
That's fabulous. So I'm sort of curious to know, what's the nature of your disability and how did it come about?
Yeah. So I also have a spinal cord injury, like Adam. As I mentioned, I'm a quadruplet, so there were 4 of us in the womb at the same time. And so we were about 2 months premature. But for all intents and purposes, when we were delivered, we were as healthy as you could be for being 2 months premature. There were no real complications. I was the heaviest of my sisters at 2 pounds. But yeah, so we were small. And then when I was 6 days old, my doctor left what's called my umbilical catheter open by mistake, which caused me to lose a third of the blood in my body, which caused spinal shock and then paralyzed me. So at that point, the spinal shock, it paralyzed me. I have a spinal cord injury now as a result. So even though I'm technically an acquired injury, I've spent my entire life using some kind of mobility device, whether it was leg braces or a walker and now just a full-time wheelchair user.
Wow. So unlike Amanda, you didn't really know anything different, right?
Yeah, no. And it was weird. If you were to talk to my parents, they would always say that, I never viewed myself as having a disability. And I never really interacted with anyone that was disabled until when I started doing sports in high school. Yeah, I've essentially grown up using a wheelchair.
Gotcha. So I'm sort of curious to know, how did your education lead to the University of Illinois?
Sports led me to the University of Illinois. It was I was not involved in sports until high school. Since my dad actually was, he had played baseball and really liked baseball, they found a baseball team that I could join that was called the Friends of Handicapped Children. Adam loves the story. There's a great picture of me in a baseball uniform. On my first day of high school, my high school track coach at the time asked me if I used my wheelchair permanently or if I just had a broken leg. When I told him that I was in the chair permanently, he was like, "Oh, cool. Well, do you want to come out for the track team?" And I kind of looked at him like, I just told you I can't walk. I think I'm going to do a running sport. And he said, "Yeah, no, I've seen other kids in wheelchairs at our high school state meet. Is this something you'd want to try?" And I didn't know what I was getting myself into. I don't like confrontation. I don't like saying no to things. I'll make myself uncomfortable before putting myself in an awkward situation. So I said yes, not knowing what I was doing. And so my high school actually raised money for my first racing chair. They found a local sports team up in northern New Jersey where they were able to measure me for my first racing chair and sort of teach me the mechanics of wheelchair racing. But once I actually got the racing chair, I did a majority of my training in my high school team. My plan was wheelchair racing was something that I was going to do maybe for a year or two, and I was going to be a teacher. I had my whole life planned out. I was going to go to the College of New Jersey, get my teaching degree, teach in New Jersey, and that was that. But as I started racing more, and you would go to these junior national meets and things like that, everyone keeps mentioning University of Illinois. Illinois is like something you always hear. In my head, being from New Jersey, I was like, why would anyone ever want to go to Illinois? There's nothing out there. And so
cornfields. There's a lot of cornfields.
Yeah, there's corn. There's no beaches. There's no bagels. There's no pizza. Like all of the things that I loved as, a non-athlete, like I just loved pizza and bagels and video games and everything. There was no reason for me to ever consider going to Illinois, but I kept hearing it enough. And I started to get decent at wheelchair racing. And at Adam, every summer we have a sports camp for high schoolers and younger kids with disabilities to do wheelchair racing. And so I went, I think it was my sophomore year, I came out there to just learn from the best, to go to Illinois. And I got on this campus and I fell in love with everything about it. I got to meet some of my idols like Amanda McGrory and Josh George and some other really just incredible wheelchair athletes. The campus itself is gorgeous. And I remember leaving there and I said, this is where I want to go to school. And so that is where my focus became the next 2 years, to get Adam to like me enough to recruit me. He vividly remembers me meeting him, totally. And me going up to him and annoying him about the school. Yeah, so I applied to University of Illinois, and I actually, when I got my offer of admission, I accepted the offer of admission without even telling my parents, because I knew that there was just no other school. That was it. As soon as I got in, that's where I was going. So that's how I ended up here.
Adam, can you corroborate that story?
Yeah, I have a vivid recollection of places we may have met, somewhere between California and New Jersey. One of those.
Adam also doesn't remember meeting me.
It's just rude. It's so rude. I was such a prominent personality. I had to work up the courage to talk to the Adam Bleakney, and he doesn't even remember where we met. It was Spokane, Washington.
See, I named that state because that's between.
They're hazing you, Adam. I love it. Okay, Brian, I'm sort of curious to know, what was it like being a student athlete there at the University of Illinois, and what type of degrees did you take?
Yeah, being a student athlete at the University of Illinois was something that, like Amanda had said, took a little bit of adjusting when I first got here. This was the first time, that I had been away from home, and significantly far away from home. I didn't have my support system as with my siblings as well. We had spent our entire academic career up to college all in the same classes, having that connection. And so it took a little bit of adjusting. I'm a very academic person by nature, though, and athletics has always sort of been something I've had to work very hard towards. So for me, the whole it was more figuring out, like, the school side of things was not particularly challenging for me, because I was always like, that was where my head was like geared towards. When I got here, the goal was still to get a degree. That was kind of the expectation. My sisters were all in school. My brother had just gotten into law school. And so we were like, academics are something that's like, heavily sort of emphasized in my family. So it was kind of like, that was my main goal. And on the athletic side of things, the goal was to make a Paralympic team. But it was sort of like, I'll be here and I will do the whole school thing and work towards that. And if it happens, great, but I'm here to get a degree. But yeah, as I got more comfortable here, in terms of just sort of finding my place, my friends, and sort of that balance, I was able to sort of create a system where I could prioritize both athletics and academics and succeed in both. When I came to the university in 2008, I still had wanted to be a teacher, and so my degree was in English and secondary education. And so that took me through the 2012 Paralympic Games in London, which was the first Paralympic team that I ever made. And so that sort of checked off that box of, I made a Paralympic team. That was the goal. I also have a degree. But I left the 2012 Games feeling like there was more that I could accomplish with the sport. And with conversations with Adam, helping me sort of realize that there was potential there in terms of athletics, it was like, okay, I want to, continue to see what I could do on the athletic side of things. I knew that I didn't want to just be sitting, not only focusing on athletics. So then I decided to enroll in a master's program in special education as well, because I figured if I'm here training and I know I want to be a teacher, I should try to, get an additional degree and have the skills that I can use that. So once I'm done racing, I'm going to be able to, transfer pretty seamlessly into the work world.
That's fabulous. So were there some mentors, either in your youth or in your collegiate experience, that come to mind? Yeah,
I think family obviously is kind of goes without saying. My sisters and I think just the bond of the four of us being so close and going through life at the exact same stages as we all rely on each other and look up to each other and sort of what each of us in the time that I've actually I got here as back in 2008. Adam has become someone that I know that I can always go to when I have some sort of issue or just kind of anyone to talk to. His insight and just sort of philosophy towards life is, I respect it a lot, and it's really nice to know that throughout all of the major moments in my life since I've come to Illinois, that he has been a constant source of guidance and just wisdom that has really kind of helped me get to where I am today.
That's fabulous. So what's been your greatest challenge as well as accomplishment?
You would think that by now, the third person, I would have a really good answer, or like a definitive, tangible answer here for this. I think I will echo the sentiments of Amanda and Adam in that, and sort of the perception of sort of obstacles and sort of how we can view them as sort of accomplishments. I guess on a more sort of just personal sort of challenge, I think the transition from high school to sort of college, and then that transition at learning to be an adult is something that's particularly challenging for any individual, but especially an individual with a disability, and sort of navigating the world that really is not accessible and not designed to it does not lend itself to disability and access. And so that has been a challenge, but it's also, again, it's all about that perception and how you view those challenges as you face them. And so when you look at a barrier to access or things like that, it's seeing how can we solve this problem, how can we make it accessible, and to really just not let the obstacles sort of get in the way of what you're trying to achieve.
So let's switch gears, and I'd like to talk about the adaptive athletics program at the University of Illinois and the history of adaptive athletics for that matter. And I'm wondering, Maybe we'll start with Adam, since you're the more seasoned person of the group. What's the backstory? How did adaptive athletics start at the University of Illinois, and what was going on in the country at that time?
Yeah, so the American Legion, the local American Legion in 1947, proposed to the president of Illinois, proposed this idea of creating a program, really an experiment, to educate veterans returning from World War II that had a mobility impairment, were wheelchair users, paraplegics. And that was approved as an initiative, but very novel. I'll say it was very much very novel. The idea that you would spend state resources on someone with a physical disability was such an alien concept, because why would you waste good money that could be used on someone without a physical disability who could then become an active and gainful member of the economy and society? So it was a risk. And I'll say too that prior to the mid 40s and the advent of prescriptions that could extend the lifespan of individuals with physical disability, the prospects weren't all that great in terms of longevity and quality of life. And so it really was the genesis of not just our program, but programs and opportunities across the world, because there really was no need for anything of this nature prior to for individuals that had traumatic spinal cord injuries. And so 1948, the program started on the campus in Galesburg, Illinois. And they didn't get too comfortable, though. They didn't get, because ultimately they were able to gain a foothold on the Champaign campus. So the University of the Champaign-Urbana campus agreed to take on the 12. I think there were 12 or 14 students who were promised 2 years of education. So they said, "Well, we promised that education for you, so we'll."
It's 22.
It's 22. Thank you. So those.
So we have an archivist in our midst.
That's good. So those students, I know, I need that on the fly. So in 1949, we moved to Champaign-Urbana in a tar paper shack just across the street from our current premises, and we've been here since. From the beginning stages, athletics was seen both as a method of therapy, so therapeutic and rehabilitative, but also as an opportunity to change perceptions of individuals who are wheelchair users by broader society, but also an understanding of the overall health and wellness and emotional psyche of the individuals that were in wheelchairs. And so from the beginning, they played wheelchair basketball, they played wheelchair football, they bowled, they did anything and everything they could do out of a wheelchair. And also were able to be competitive because they had these cutting edge Everson Jennings foldable stainless steel wheelchairs, which at that time were the premium on the market, and much better than the chairs that they're using in the UK that looked like lazy boys on wheels with two large front wheels and two small back wheels. And so from those beginnings, we've progressed through the decades. Wheelchair track, of course, was part of those early days of sport. And then I'll fast forward 75 years till today, and the continuation of those same principles, which competitive sport, but equally so, this program is about education, it's about outreach, innovation, and it's about service and research. But those key points are part of this program and have had significant impact locally, across the state, across the nation, and across the world. Many of the codes and standards for architectural accessibilities that were codified in state and federal law were birthed here on this campus, whether it's gradients used and slopes on ramps, or there's a great example of an initiative that was vetted and perfected here and then adopted in state and federal law. I think it's one of a kind and unique, both for its history and what it's done for the the movement for individuals with physical disability, and I think continues to this day. And we've had student athletes like Brian and Amanda who have been incredibly impactful on the movement and continue to be ambassadors for each of those 5 pillars that I referenced.
Yeah, well, thanks for the brief history of the adaptive athletics program at University of Illinois, which dates back to just after World War II, from what you said. And you made reference to the conditions there at the University of Illinois. And my recollection, and again, I graduated better part of 40 years ago, was that the adaptive athletics program then, 40 years ago, was quite robust, right? At the Armory, right? I can remember all these competitions going on throughout the year. And the campus itself is probably one of the most ADA compliant campuses in the country. And I don't think it was like later on. I think it was that way, at the very beginning. Maybe you have some history. One of you can speak to the campus's accessibility.
So just to touch on the accessibility there, I have to say one of the biggest surprises to me, from living in Champaign, Urbana for so long, and then moving out of that community and moving to Colorado Springs, which is also, it's the Olympic and Paralympic city. The headquarters are here, so there's a huge number of athletes, both non-disabled and disabled, that live and train in town, is how ingrained disability culture is within the entire Champaign-Urbana community. It was never a question going out to dinner, going to a new store, going to get your hair cut, whether or not that space was going to be physically accessible to a wheelchair user, because it's just automatic. It's been a part of the culture in that town for the past 50 years, and continues to be that way. Every single building that gets built has ADA accommodations, there's accessible door buttons, there's everything that you would expect. It was a really big surprise for me coming here, making reservations at a restaurant, or trying to get my hair cut, or going to meet a friend for drinks at a bar, to discover there's a step or 2 steps, or it's down a flight of stairs and there's no accessible entrance. And that's just not something that I've even thought about for the past 16 years. So just a little anecdote on how impactful that is as someone with a disability and someone who was a part of that community in town.
Let's switch gears and talk a little bit about Paralympics, because you each have, a connection to the Paralympics. Brian, I'm going to let you go first. You had made reference to the fact that was a bucket list item for you. I think that's the way you phrased it. Was it the 2012 games, the ones in London, that you first participated in?
Yes.
So what sports did you participate in, and what was your experience?
So 2012 was my first games. I've since been to the 2016 games in Rio, and then most recently the 2021 games in Tokyo. My experience at my first game, I think I can maybe speak for everyone as well. Your first games is something truly special and sort of different from any subsequent games that you qualify for. In that everything is just, you're just kind of in awe of everything. The stadium and the dining hall, and just sort of the village itself, and just being surrounded by some of the best athletes in the world. My main focused events for the London games, at least, were really the shorter distance events. So the 100, the 400, and kind of the 800, but really and the 200. I forgot that existed back then. The 1, 2, and 4 were my main events. But yeah, so I was much more of a shorter distance racer.
Excellent. I remember, I think this is true, that there were some billboards, maybe just a billboard in London, that said the Olympics were the warm-up game for the Paralympics. Is that true?
Yes, there were. Those were really cool to see. London did, the entire London organizing committee did really invested into the Paralympic movement and sort of promoting the Paralympics as a equal sporting event. And they engaged the public in a meaningful way. And so when we were racing and competing, the stadium was sold out. There were, I think, 65, 70,000 people in the stadium. And so to compete on a stage, not only just the Paralympic stage in general, but then in a sold out stadium, truly is something that I will never forget, sort of hearing the stadium roar as I was racing the 100 next to the athlete from Great Britain, who was also, I think he won the gold medal that year. So to hear them roar when they announced his name was honestly like an incredible moment.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. So Amanda, your Paralympic experience goes back one games before that, because I think you'd said that you'd started with the 2008 games. I'm sort of curious to know, what has been your Paralympic experience?
So my first exposure to the Paralympics was the Atlanta 1996 games. There's an American athlete named Leanne Shannon, who was 14 at the time and had just broken the world record in the 100 meter. And this was prior to me getting involved in sports. My parents were still trying to find a local organization where I would get a chance to compete. So they shared the story with me. I don't remember whether it was on TV or newspaper or whatever. And I was like, that's it. That's who I'm going to break the world record in the 100 meters. So it turns out that I'm a terrible sprinter. It took me a little while to figure that out. But that from 1996 on, that was the goal. And so, like Brian said, it's a little bit overwhelming being out there for the first time. So there were a ton of people there in the stands, all really, really excited to watch. I think there were 91,000 people in the stadium. It's one of the biggest Olympic stadiums there is. Went out for my very, very first event, got out onto the track. It was at night, which is something that I wasn't used to competing under lights at the time. And it was so loud, just from like white noise and people talking amongst themselves and rustling, that you could scream on the track and the people next to you couldn't hear you. It was shocking. So it was 5,000 meters. I came in as the world record holder. I promptly panicked. I did none of the things that Adam and I talked about me doing because I was terrified. And I got really, really lucky because that race was also the worst crash in a women's race in the history of the Paralympic Games. So I believe 12 people started the race and only 4 of us finished. And like everything that could have possibly gone wrong went wrong. There was the crash. We came back around the track. They were just officials standing in the middle of the track and people swerving around them. It was complete chaos for the last lap and a half. So I got very lucky. And because of the crash and all of the protests that accompanied the events of the race, they decided to rerun it. So I had ended up finishing 3rd the first time around. Protests weren't complete by the time they sent us out for the medal ceremony, and they weren't sure whether we are going to rerun the race or not. So we did the whole medal ceremony. I got my bronze medal, came off of the medal stand, went back under the track, ran into one of the Team USA coaches who was like, oh, by the way, just to let you know, you have to give this back and you get to do the race again. And I was like, oh, I get to do it again? This is my first race and I won a medal. This is pretty cool. And I saw my parents after that and did not have the heart to tell them that I had to give the medal back. So my mom and dad came and met me under the stadium, and they're making me take pictures with the medal, with volunteers. My mom's making me bite on it. She's got pictures of her and my dad with it around their neck. And I couldn't tell them that I had to give it back. So I waited until we got back to the village, called them on Skype, was like, Mom, sit down, Dad. I need you to take a deep breath. I have to give the medal back. We're doing the race again. And my mom, having no filter, was just like, well, what if you never win another one? I was like, this is great. This is just the support that I need right now. But luckily enough, we ran the race again 4 days later. Adam and I had a little chat about all the things I was supposed to do that I chose not to do the first time around. Was feeling a little bit more comfortable, ran the race to my strengths, and came out of it with the gold medal in the photo finish. So that is my first Paralympic experience.
That is an amazing story. Thanks so much for sharing. And that was your first and second medal for the same race, the 5,000 meter, the bronze?
My first and second race, my first and second medal. So they actually just redistributed the medals that were given out the first time because they only make one medal per event. So I have a used gold medal that was originally awarded to someone else.
You can only imagine how that person feels, or how that person's mom feels, that you're wearing her gold medal.
I think the rest of the athletes weren't super excited about rerunning the race. I thought that it was going to be a great opportunity for me to not choke, which I didn't. Kind of, a little bit. I still didn't do it exactly perfectly.
So that was your inaugural experience in Beijing, and I'm wondering if you can just briefly make reference to your other 3 Paralympic experiences, because they were also successful.
Some more than others. I came out of Beijing as a 4-time medalist, went to London, had really high expectations for myself there, and actually came home empty-handed. So this kind of leads into what we were talking about a little bit before. I came out of London, was pretty bummed, wasn't sure what the future looked like for me as a wheelchair racer. Continued racing, continued training, and was really frustrated with my performances. And that's when we got close to Rio, and I had gotten to the point where I was really frustrated, and I knew that I wasn't going to perform the way that I wanted to, reach my own expectations, and felt like it was time for a risk. So we kind of threw a whole bunch of big changes at everything all at once. But I was at the point where it wasn't going to be worse. It was going to be better, or I wasn't going to medal. And I already knew that my performances were not where they needed to be compared to athletes across the rest of the world. But I really do think that spending some time talking to Adam, kind of refocusing, reprioritizing was super beneficial there. So I was lucky enough to come out of the Rio Games with 3 medals. 2 of them were Team USA sweeps, where 2 of my other Illinois teammates, we went first, second, third in the 1500. 2 days later, we did it in the 5,000. Very cute. It was the mixed sweep because we all have MC last names. So that was fun. And then Tokyo was a totally different experience for me. I had moved back to Illinois after I finished my internship here at the USOPC in 2018, was really focusing on the Tokyo Games, had planned for that to be my last. But also, as we have talked about, and as you know from what Adam has told you about the University of Illinois program, the goal of the program is not just to create great athletes, it's to create great people who really contribute to the sport and to the movement, and go on to be successful in every aspect of their life. And that is, sports are great. Going to the Paralympics is great, but I was never going to retire as a professional athlete. And so it was the right time for me to take that step and move on. And it's difficult, and it's always hard. Being an athlete is a huge part of who I am. It's something I've been doing for 23 years. And stepping away from elite athletics feels a little bit like you're losing a piece of your identity. And it's just another reason why moving from the University of Illinois, from that sports program over to the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee was the perfect move for me, because it fits into my professional training and my degree, but also it keeps me attached to the sports, to the Olympic and Paralympic movements that I've put so much of my heart and soul into for the past 23 years.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. Very impressive. Adam, did you want to add anything about Paralympics, either from your own personal perspective, being to all the Olympic Games you've been at and coaching all the athletes you have, or otherwise?
Yeah, real quick, just to see my first games was in Sydney in 2000, and have been to each game since then. But to watch the development of the sport and the interest grow, and to see athletes like Brian and Amanda celebrated for their elite level athleticism and prowess and sporting ability has been rewarding, and to have been a part of that too has been more rewarding.
Yeah, well, it's very obvious to me, just the way that Amanda and Brian have made reference to the role that you've played in their collegiate and then beyond collegiate experiences, that you've influenced a lot of individuals, countless individuals directly, and then I suspect many, many more indirectly. I'd like to just spend a couple minutes before we wrap up talking about Stay Focused. And Amanda, I know that you and Brian have both been involved with Stay Focused. I'm wondering if you could give a brief overview of what the Stay Focused program that Roger Mueller started is all about.
Well, I think Brian probably has a little bit more information about the history of Stay Focused and how it got started. He's involved in a very different capacity than I have been. I was lucky enough to be invited down as a participant to scuba dive for the first time, and then on subsequent trips to continue working on my scuba diving skills after I got my certification. But it's a really incredible organization that brings down teenagers with physical disabilities to learn how to scuba dive and become PADI certified. It's done free of charge. Roger does all of the fundraising for that, and I know that Brian has been involved with their board and helping out with some of the more administrative and organizational aspects of the organization.
I can jump in just real quickly. So yeah, Stay Focused is honestly, it was a life-changing organization that I was a part of as a teenager. It was something that as a kid with a disability, hearing that you can go scuba diving is not ever on your sort of radar of things that are in the realm of possibility. And so when I was offered the opportunity, I jumped on it because it was something that seemed so cool. And so as a teenager, you look at it and it's a really cool opportunity that you get to tell your friends, oh, I'm a certified scuba diver. But when you look at it from, just from sort of a larger picture and sort of what the trip actually does in terms of instilling confidence and, promoting sort of, independence and for a young person with a disability, showing them what they're capable of doing. Again, in a world that is very, that is not accessible usually. It really gives you that confidence to go on to the next stage of your life into young adulthood, knowing that, part of the program is you set goals. And when you follow up the next year, you see how if you've met those goals or not. And so it teaches you that as you work towards how to work towards your goals and to be successful really in any aspect of your life.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. I think it's a wonderful program. I think of it as adaptive scuba training. And there's another program that another member of the Special Fathers Network helped create, similar but not identical to the program that we've just talked about, which is called DiveHeart, diveheart.org. It's a bit more comprehensive. They've got programs all over the United States and then beyond. And they do a lot of adaptive training. Like one of my daughters and I went through the buddy diver training so that we can help individuals like yourselves, paraplegics, quadriplegics, people that are blind for that matter, go scuba diving. It's very rewarding all the way around. So Amanda, I'm wondering what advice can you offer a parent raising a child with a physical challenge?
Well, I'm not a parent, but I have talked to my parents about this. And after my diagnosis, when I was still in the hospital, still finishing up my rehab, my mom and dad were both required to go meet with a psychologist and just to talk about the entire experience. And they were given the advice there, and they were told that it is very, very important for them to treat me equally to, at the time I had one younger sister, I now have two, that I need to struggle and that I need to learn how to fail and that they cannot protect me. And if they try to protect me, they try to make sure that I never experience any of those hardships, discrimination, any of the things that you have to deal with as a person with a disability living in a world that is not made for you, that they were going to do more harm than good. And that when it came time for me to spread my wings and fly away, to go to college, to get a job, to do whatever it was, that I would not be prepared to deal with the world in any way. And so I remember talking to both of them, particularly talking to my mom about this, just her telling me how hard it was when I was a 5-year-old, watching me for 25 minutes try to make my bed. But everybody had chores, and my chore was that I had to make my bed, had to clean the bathroom, had to do everything that my sisters had to. And it took me a little while, and sometimes it took me a little longer to figure out how to do it. But because of that, I learned problem solving. I learned how to deal with frustrations. I learned how to deal with failure. I learned how to be creative. And it kind of sucks that that is the reality, but in truth, the world is not designed for people with disabilities. And while we shouldn't have to be creative and make our own accommodations, the truth is that in order to be successful, it's a skill you have to have.
Yeah, well, great response. And one of the things that I've heard said before along those lines is that by making it easy for your child, and this has to do with just raising children, it doesn't have to do with disability, but if you make it too easy for your kids and you're always picking them up and dusting them off and trying to prevent them from, falling or injuring themselves, that you're further handicapping them. Not intentionally, but the unintended consequence is that, you're not letting them learn how to deal with adversity and to be able to do things on their own. So very well stated. And then is there any advice you can offer a student who's thinking about college?
Well, talking to 3 University of Illinois alums, we all have had fantastic experiences there. I know Adam and I both mentioned earlier just the incredible history of accessibility and dedication to adaptive athletics there. But it's not necessarily the right fit for everyone. I know a lot of students with disabilities who have gone to other schools for different reasons. University of Illinois is a very, very big school. It is tricky to find your place there. I think that we had a little bit of an advantage coming into the sports programs. You kind of enter with a built-in group of friends, which makes it a little bit easier to branch out and to meet other people. But I was a psych major, and I think my graduating class just in psychology within the College of LAS was over 1,000 people. That is a huge, huge class, and I had different people in every class that I took, so I never really made any friends within my major just because it was so big. And so I think that there are a lot of factors, how close you want to be to home, whether you want to move away, live on your own, live in the dorms, what you are interested in as far as majors beyond sports. For me, sports was the big factor that pushed me to the University of Illinois. But if that was not my goal, if I wasn't shooting towards the Paralympics, I may have chosen a completely different path.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing and being so open and candid with your response. So do you have to jump?
I do have to jump. I'm 15 minutes late for the meeting I'm supposed to be running.
Okay, well, thank you so much for being so
Thank you.
I've really enjoyed the conversation. Brian, you're going to be the last man standing. So the question is about advice, and I'm wondering what advice you can offer a parent raising a child with a physical challenge.
Yeah, I think I would probably echo a very similar sentiment to what Amanda just sort of said in that. So my parents, after my injury, they didn't go see a counselor or anything, but they had 3 other newborns, and then my older brother, who was a toddler. And so there was not really a whole lot of time for my parents. It was very much an adapt on the fly sort of thing. And so I mentioned earlier in that, when I was growing up, I knew that obviously I was different than everyone else and that I did things differently, but I never would have guessed. I guess I would have never said I was disabled. And I mean, literally I was, but in sort of how I viewed my perception of the world, it was just like, I did things a little bit differently, but the expectation was that I was doing them. And so my parents did just that. I was treated no different than my siblings. And I think that was and is the most important thing that a parent can do for their disabled child. And it is hard. I cannot imagine, how difficult it is to maybe watch your child, what you perceive as struggling. But a lot of times people sometimes view, a lot of able-bodied people might view the way that someone with a disability is how they're doing something as a struggle, when in reality it's us sort of just, we're just doing it differently from sort of the way, like the quote unquote normal way that it's done. But by having, setting expectations and responsibilities that I had and not absolving me from sort of, what you would expect of any other child in your household, I think it did prepare me to sort of, encounter obstacles and, as I got older and be able to problem solve and think it through.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. And I'm thinking about your 3 sisters, the ones that are the same age, because you're part of a set of quadruplets. I imagine whenever they were struggling with something, they probably didn't get a lot of sympathy or pity along the way, just because, you were their, sort of a benchmark, not the benchmark, right? And I'm wondering if you think they become a little bit more self-reliant and resistant as a result of just having you as their brother.
I think so. I would like to think so. When they watch this or listen to this, they'll probably chuckle, and they'll send me some snarky comment. But I would think so. I think that there is a unique bond in general of being a quadruplet, but then having this additional layer of sort of disability and ability sort of at play in terms of how we did things growing up. And I think they would look back and say, like, they would see me doing things, and it would be that they had less room to sort of either complain about something or to say that they didn't want to do it, because if I was doing it, then that meant they could probably do it too. I relied on them. So they were, all of my siblings were so instrumental sort of in terms of just my support system and making sure that when we had to figure things out and adapt things, that I was included and that I could participate. And so again, it was really this relationship built on trust and sort of ensuring that I was, treated no differently and part of everything. And so that there was not that division of sort of ability between us.
That's fabulous. So if somebody wants to learn more about the Adaptive Athletics program at the University of Illinois or contact you, what's the best way to do that?
Well, you could always go to the disability.illinois.edu website. That has all of the information about our athletic services as well as academic services. So it's kind of really centralized in one nice location. Emails are always great too. You have our email, so feel free to share those. I think Amanda, Adam, and I could talk for hours, and we could have kept going. And so there's always more information to share and we love talking to people. So if there are more questions, never hesitate to reach out.
We'll be sure to include that in the show notes, so it'll make it as easy as possible for individuals to follow up with you. Adam, Amanda, and Brian, thank you for taking the time and many insights. As a reminder, Adam, Amanda, and Brian are just 3 of the individuals involved with the Special Fathers Network, a mentoring program for fathers raising a child with special needs. If you'd like to be a mentor father or are seeking advice from a mentor father with a similar situation to your own, please go to 21stcenturydads.org. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. As you probably know, the 21st Century Dads Foundation is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization, which means we need your help to keep our content free to all concerned. Would you please consider making a tax-deductible contribution? I would really appreciate your support. Adam, Amanda, and Brian, thanks again.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening to the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children match up with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for dads to support other dads. To find out more, go to 21stcenturydads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we would be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad. Lastly, we're always looking to share interesting stories. If you'd like to share your story or know of a compelling story, please send an email to david@21stcenturydads.org.
The Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast was produced by me, Tom Couch. Thanks again to Horizon Therapeutics, who believe that science and compassion must work together to transform lives. That's why they work tirelessly to research, develop, and bring forward medicines for people living with rare and rheumatic diseases. Discover more about Horizon Therapeutics at horizontherapeutics.com.